The words hung in the air, weighted with something unspoken. Larson's eyes followed Eric's hand as he pulled out a leather wallet and flipped it open, revealing a gleaming badge. "Eric Porter," Eric said, his tone as casual as if he were introducing himself to a neighbor. "Head of Internal Affairs, Sacramento Division." Larson froze, his eyes darting to the badge, then back to Eric's face, searching for some sign that this was a joke. There was no humor in Eric's expression, only quiet authority and a hint of disappointment. "Internal Affairs?" Larson repeated, his voice cracking slightly. "Yes," Eric interrupted, sparing him the trouble of finishing the thought. "I oversee officer conduct. My job is to ensure that the people wearing this badge uphold the integrity and values it's meant to represent." Larson's face paled, his once confident demeanor unraveling in real time. He took a small step back, his hand falling away from his belt as though the weight of his own authority had suddenly become too heavy. Eric stepped forward, closing the gap Larson had instinctively created. "Do you know what the most troubling part of this interaction has been, Officer Larson?" Eric asked, his voice calm but piercing. Larson didn't answer. He looked like a man who had just realized he'd walked into quicksand with no idea how to escape. "It's not the profiling," Eric continued, "though that's bad enough. It's not the baseless escalation either. It's the fact that you've done all of this without even realizing who you were talking to. You assumed I wouldn't know my rights, that I wouldn't understand the laws you're sworn to uphold." "And why?" Larson opened his mouth, but no words came. Eric's gaze bore into him, unrelenting. "Because I didn't fit your idea of someone deserving respect," Eric finished for him. His words weren't angry, but they carried the weight of an indictment. "And that's not just a problem for me, officer. That's a problem for everyone you encounter in this uniform." Larson's shoulders sagged slightly, the full weight of Eric's words settling over him. His eyes flicked down to the badge in Eric's hand as if hoping it would disappear if he didn't look too closely. Eric stepped back, giving Larson a moment to breathe, but his voice remained firm. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to take a step back, return my documents, and think very carefully about what you say next." Larson hesitated, his lips parting as he debated whether to push back or comply. The hesitation cost him. Eric's voice lowered slightly, the final blow landing. "And you're going to hear from me again, not as a driver you stopped on the side of the road, but as the man tasked with deciding whether you're fit to wear that badge." Larson swallowed hard, his face reddening as reality set in. He reached into his chest pocket, pulled out Eric's license and registration, and handed them over with slightly trembling hands. Eric took them without a word, tucking them into his wallet before stepping toward the driver's side door of his car. He paused with one hand on the handle, glancing over his shoulder to meet Larson's gaze one last time. "Remember this, Officer Larson," Eric said. "The badge doesn't make you better than anyone. It makes you accountable to everyone." As Eric slid into his car and started the engine, Larson stood frozen in the fading light, his confidence shaken and his future uncertain. But for Eric, this was far from over. His next move would ripple through the entire department. The drive home was quiet, but Eric's mind was anything but. The encounter replayed in his head, not because it was unique, but because it wasn't. Larson wasn't the first officer Eric had dealt with like this, and he knew he wouldn't be the last. But this time, things would be different. This time, Eric had the authority to act. The next morning, Eric sat at his desk as early sunlight streamed through the blinds of his office at the Sacramento Police Department's Internal Affairs Division. An open file sat in front of him, Officer Bradley Larson. His record wasn't spotless. Minor complaints of unprofessional conduct, excessive stops, and vague misunderstandings that had never been properly addressed. Eric leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, thinking about the broader implications. Larson wasn't an anomaly, he was a symptom of a deeper problem. And Eric wasn't interested in putting a bandage on a bullet wound. A knock on the office door interrupted his thoughts. His assistant, Linda, stepped in holding a stack of reports. "Morning, Mr. Porter. I've got the summary on last month's misconduct cases. Also, Chief Daniels wanted me to remind you about the department review next week." Eric nodded, taking the files from her. "Thanks, Linda. Can you also schedule a meeting with Chief Daniels for this afternoon?" There's something I need to discuss with him. Linda hesitated, sensing the weight in Eric's tone. Of course, she said before slipping out of the room. Eric turned his attention back to Larson's file, but his focus wasn't just on the officer. This was bigger than one man and one interaction. It was about the culture that allowed someone like Larson to feel justified in his behavior. And if Eric had anything to do with it, that culture was about to change. If there was one thing Eric understood, it was that change had to start from the top. That afternoon, he sat across from Chief Daniels in a conference room. Daniels, a seasoned officer with graying hair and a no-nonsense attitude, listened carefully as Eric described the traffic stop. I could have brushed it off as just another bad encounter, Eric said, his tone firm. But that would have been a mistake. Larson's actions aren't just about him. They're a symptom of a bigger issue. Daniels let out a slow breath, rubbing his temples. This isn't the first time Larson's name has come up, he admitted. We've always handled it internally, quietly. And that's the problem, Eric countered. Staying quiet doesn't fix anything. It allows it to continue. It's time to make noise. Daniels studied him, the weight of the discussion evident in his expression. What exactly are you suggesting? A full department review, Eric said without hesitation. Not just officers, but our training, policies, and accountability measures. We can't keep ignoring this. If we don't hold ourselves to higher standards, how can we expect the public to trust us? Daniels leaned forward, clasping his hands together. You realize this won't sit well with everyone? Good, Eric replied. It's long overdue. In the following weeks, the department underwent intense scrutiny. Meetings, interviews, data collection, and public forums. Eric worked relentlessly, ensuring both officers and the community had a voice. The Larson incident became a turning point, forcing the department to confront its flaws head-on. As for Larson, he faced an internal hearing. Eric didn't shy away from his role in the process, sitting across from the officer as he struggled under questioning. In the end, Larson was suspended, but Eric knew real progress wasn't just about punishing one officer, it was about preventing others like him from taking the same path. Months later, Eric stood at a podium, addressing officers, city officials, and local residents. His speech wasn't about blame, it was about responsibility. Justice isn't just about catching criminals, he said, his voice steady. It's about ensuring those who wear the badge uphold integrity, fairness, and respect for everyone they serve. That's the kind of policing we should stand for. The room erupted in applause, but Eric didn't linger on it. This wasn't the end of a battle. It was the beginning of real change. As he stepped off the stage, scanning the faces in the crowd, some hopeful, some skeptical, he knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. But change was coming, and for now, that was enough. If this story resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Let's start the conversations that matter, the ones that lead to real change. Subscribe to our channel for more stories like this. Stories that challenge, inspire, and remind us of the power of standing up for what's right.